Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. Well, we already recapped Frieze New York earlier this month. I wanted to dive into another important art fair that occurs in New York in May. That's TEFAF New York. It's always refreshing to visit TEFAF. The art is a mix of contemporary art, modern art, more historical works, design, jewelry, and other collectibles. And the atmosphere is completely unique from a typical art fair. It's a calm, sophisticated setting. The floors are carpeted, the booths are painted, and how can we forget about the free champagne and oysters? I also find it interesting that a select number of contemporary galleries prefer to exhibit at TEFAF rather than at an exclusively contemporary art fair. We dig into all of this further on this week's episode of the podcast, as we're joined by Will Korner, Head of Fairs at TEFAF. We hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks so much for listening. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Not at all. Thank you for inviting me, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So TEFAF New York, it's one of my favorite fairs in the art fair circuit. I think it stands out from the more predictable contemporary art fairs, not only in terms of the art on view, but also really the visitor experience in its entirety. For our listeners who haven't had a chance to visit TEFAF in New York, can you share what the experience was like this year?
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. I also love Frieze and Independence and 154, as I'm sure you do too. So when you're interviewing them, inevitably they get the pat on the back for the best experience. But no, I worked at TEFAF for many years in my previous role, and it was always an absolute pleasure to be there. So TEFAF stands for the European Fine Art Foundation, and we run two fairs internationally, one in Maastricht, which is a bigger venue with 270 galleries, and we encompass art from ancient all the way up until the latest contemporary artists. And then, of course, we run TEFAF New York in May every year. This was actually our 10th edition there. And we are combining modern and contemporary art with also design, jewelry, and some antiquities as well, some ancient art. And that sort of combination is the DNA of TEFAF that we try to bring to the fair and for people to experience when they're there. You might have already heard this from other speakers that for art fairs in 2024 very much felt like they were getting back to normal. This really was the first one since COVID where everything seemed to be going really well in terms of planning, in terms of what everyone was bringing, these incredible artworks they've been saving for this particular moment to bring to the Park Avenue Armory. So the experience is a huge part of it. I mean, that experience after COVID is something that everyone really valued beforehand, but is now really being exacerbated. And when you come to the fair, you come under I hope you've been to the Park Avenue Armory. If you haven't, please do go to another fair or another event there. It's an amazing venue. We're unique that we also have access to the historic rooms. So we have 16 galleries that are actually in these amazing 100-year-old rooms where you have contemporary art hanging in these beautiful dark sort of wooden interiors. And then you have within the drill hall itself, the main part of the fair, this combination of modern and contemporary art with design. So if you come in and you're in the center zone, and on your left, you have Jacques Lacoste, one of the most important design galleries showing 20th century design. He had this incredible Dali sofa with Jean-Michel Frank. It's a combination of the two artists. You've got David Zwirner showing George Orr with Georges Morandi. So a sort of interesting combination of ceramics with modern art. Then you have Robert Landau Fine Art, the most important 20th century gallery really in the world. And you've got a certain Gagosian gallery on the right that you might have heard of doing an incredible Twombly and Bryce Martin presentation. So it's a sort of incredible experience with things that you might know from other contemporary fairs, like these big names, but showing a very different aspect to their programs than you might have at other fairs.
Yeah, and for me, it's really refreshing. I attend many art fairs in the year, and so to visit TEFAF and to see contemporary art, which is what I'm predominantly focused on, integrated with historical pieces, design, jewelry, other collectibles there. It's really nice to see. I don't know the exact number of contemporary galleries that participated at TEFAF this year, but when I see them as I'm walking through the fair, I do wonder why they strategized and chose TEFAF over maybe a more traditional contemporary art fair in May in New York, for example, like Frieze or like Independent. What are some of the motivating factors for the contemporary galleries that do exhibit at TEFAF to choose to participate in that fair versus some of the other predominantly contemporary fairs?
Well, yeah, it's absolutely key to TEFAF, both as a foundation and both of our fairs, because we are an arts foundation, unlike many of the fairs that you've mentioned. That's actually our structure. And I think for a lot of contemporary galleries and their artists, it's very interesting and a wonderful opportunity to, as you've said, be shown within that context. I, in fact, am aware of artists that have written into their contracts with galleries that they wish to be, or at least even can contractually need to be exhibited at both fairs due to that reasoning, but also the strong museum presence and connections that we have, and this opportunity to be shown alongside sort of bastions of 20th century or even earlier art. I mean, if you quote, I think it's very interesting for various gallerists and artists to have this opportunity, but some of them actually choose it. Like it's really how they see their own program. If you talk to someone like Kamel Manor, now Kamel is on our selection committee, and I was listening to him the other day, and to quote him, he said, he was talking about his philosophy with artists. He says that he loves artists that believe that when they're in the studio, they have to know what came before. And I think that is the sort of DNA and identity that we've created in TEFAF New York for contemporary gallery and artists.
It seemed like there was a good amount of dialogue this year about fairs occurring in New York and how high quality they can actually be, given that so many of the exhibiting galleries have physical galleries in New York. And it seems like perhaps some of them were prioritizing their gallery exhibitions over some of their fair presentations within the city. What motivated TEFAF to expand from Maastricht to New York, and do you believe the expansion has been successful?
Yeah, I think there was an opportunity to open two fairs in New York. So we opened the first fair in October 2016 and fall 2016 in New York. Now you're thinking, hold on, he said it's the 10th edition. How is it the 10th edition back in since 2016? So we ran these two fairs, and we had an identity for each of the fairs. And the spring fair, what remains TEFAF New York, was a modern and contemporary and design fair with a few of the antiquities and jewelry to show a bit of that TEFAF DNA here in New York. And then there was also a old art fair that sort of centered on the centuries in between, because we have these antiquities at TEFAF New York, which are thousands of years old, and then you have modern and contemporary art. But we had sort of a bit of everything, which is what you get in the full Maastricht fair. So that was the idea, and of course, New York is the center and continues to be the center of the international art market. So it was a very interesting opportunity to go from, rather than being this very special place in the middle of Europe where people have to travel to get to, and you have. For example, we work with Dutch partners, with local partners who have worked with us for 30, 35 years, building this incredible, huge, temporary world in Maastricht, and then going over to sort of going more towards a lot of our clients, a lot of the US museums with whom we were working closely. They still very much come over to Maastricht with their museum patron groups, as well as their directors and curators. So there was that strong link, and we felt like it was a wonderful opportunity to sort of have a taster for what TEFAF Maastricht had to offer, along with growing into very much its own wonderful independent fair. And I think that clear identity and those values has been absolutely crucial to what we believe is a success in TEFAF New York, and that it's been fully embraced by those galleries that you've just been talking about, those contemporary galleries, as an opportunity to show these bastions of both 20th and 21st century art.
So let's talk about this year's edition of the fair. What were some of the standout sales highlights?
Well, Adam, as you know, all of our galleries are desperate to tell everyone about every single sale and all their clients and all the museums they sort of so it can be a little difficult. I do. There are certain things that, from an operational point of view, you do know. You have to know what's going on because, for example, I work very closely with the shippers, so you get a certain idea from the shippers about what's actually happening rather than what people are saying or not saying to your face. But there was also, there were some brilliant stories this year. Like, in fact, on the first day, one of the galleries only presenting secondary market works, selling out. Now that is, for me, pretty unique. You can talk about many galleries having pre-sold or selling out immediately on contemporary artists, but to sell a secondary market modern British stand, so Hazlitt Holland Hibbert bought several works by Lucian Freud. That was a terrific moment for us and for them. They were slightly disappointed by it though, because it meant that they couldn't bring in more artworks to hang and sell the next day. So this is one of the there's always got to be downsides to the job and to selling things. But we also have there were several artists that sold particularly well. One of them was Pablo Picasso. I think you might know who he is. But we really enjoy the combination of having a gallery like Karma in a historic room, so not really the kind of environment you would get with a gallery like Karma, such a contemporary gallery, and having a success there. And that for us is much more valuable. I always say that I don't know how successful a fair has been until, in this case, it will be, I think, September the 15th, and that's the day that we close our applications for next year. So we just have to see. There are some incredible Giacometti works, Alberto Giacometti works, and Diego Giacometti that sold on Jacques Lacoste. There was amazing Kandinsky that sold on Robert Landau's stand. But unfortunately, I really don't get to know about these sorts of things very often.
The overall art market seems to be softening. How do you perceive the market across the different categories represented by your exhibitors? Are there certain areas, for example, that are performing quite well at the moment? And are you seeing some softening in other places?
Well, it's a very active discussion with our selection committees. I mean, when you look at our selection committees and the knowledge that's there from these, there are almost all gallerists at the fair in both modern and contemporary design, jewelry, and antiquities. So they look at that balance as well before we even get to the fair, and they make sure also that there's maybe not too many really contemporary galleries, not too many early 20th century or even 19th century galleries. So I think we've talked about, just some of the artists I've mentioned. You can already see that they're generally more established for the works that are being sold. If you take Larry Gagosian's stand, as we mentioned earlier, showing Bryce Martin rather than showing a 2024 artist who has only had a couple of museum shows and hasn't really been seized upon by various different galleries or various different, art historical understanding by this point. We are definitely more resistant to those shifts in the market because they are more sort of blue chip artists that are being offered for sale. But then you definitely see, as I said, this was all about the preparation. So you've got the selection committees getting together, talking in front of you about what might work, might not work. Then you arrive, you start seeing the artworks being unpacked, and you suddenly go, oh, right, I think ceramics are doing quite well at the moment, because you have modern and contemporary galleries showing a whole load of ceramics where you would normally expect them to be showing paintings and drawings. So that's more the, I'm an archaeologist originally, so I'm unfortunately not an expert on 20th and 21st century art, but I like to learn, and I think that's a wonderful opportunity that TEFAF offers. Then we see, if you speak to another one of our selection committees, for example, the design, they've been talking recently about the strength in the contemporary design market, as opposed to perhaps a bit of a cooling in the Art Deco or Scandinavian market. But of course, these things do change a lot. And I think because we present artists that are, in general, better known artists, as I said, I think there is a certain amount of resistance and also opportunity for galleries to show their expertise, galleries to show that these are artworks that they very much believe in, that they've had for many years, again, rather than, say, the newest artworks off the block, and to share that knowledge with buyers, with potential buyers, because if the market is softening, it's an opportunity for buyers, and that's at least the way that I see it.
So I imagine even fewer of our listeners have had the opportunity to visit TEFAF in Maastricht. I actually went several years ago. I'd love to come back again in the near future. How does the experience at Maastricht compare to TEFAF New York?
Well, you have to come back. It's the full experience is the way I would think about it. You know, there are 90 galleries at TEFAF New York, and there are 270 in Maastricht. So those sort of centuries in between of French antique furniture, Italian sculpture, Dutch old masters, impressionists, what else? Objects from the Middle East and, Islamic objects, other antiquities, contemporary artworks from very different aspects of galleries that you wouldn't know perhaps from the Frieses, from the Art Basels, from the TEFAF New Yorks. And that sort of it's a diversity of objects and offerings that we just sort of hint at in TEFAF New York that perhaps you might not even realize unless you go to TEFAF Maastricht. I quite often say that it's a fair that galleries and dealers in particular love more than any other, because in general, if they're a gallery exhibiting there, they very much love all of art history, or they have different collecting habits. Now, I know there are various contemporary gallerists who will wander off their stand and end up spending more money there than they've made in sales because they're just buying stuff that they love off other galleries. And that's pretty unique at that fair. I remember Sean Kelly this year did an amazing booth at Maastricht, which had contemporary artists. They had Kahinda Wiley and Shazia Sikander as a couple of examples. And then next to Kahinda's work, there was this incredible, this was a standing portrait with a guy holding a sword. And next to it was an 18th century sword that was just like the one in the painting. And then the Shazia Sikander, one of her absolutely stunning mosaics. Next to that was this beautiful Mughal Persian manuscript leaf, which showed a sort of similar figure from the 15th century. You cannot do that at any other fair. So when we talked about when you arrive in TEFAF New York and you had this incredible design gallery on your left, you've got Gagosian on your right. When you go to TEFAF Maastricht and you're in the middle, you've got a white cube and Kamel Manor, and then you turn around and you've got Danny Katz showing the most incredible sculpture from 800 years of sculpture. You've got Christophe de Quenotin showing incredible French antique furniture from the 18th century. You've got Richard Green showing the best impressionists you can get on the market. All these different galleries. And if you don't know these names, you've got to come to Maastricht and discover them. And maybe you've been looking too much at the 20th and 21st century. But it's an amazing opportunity. And I used to work at 15 fairs a year, and that really was the one that was really special. And I guess that kind of takes us full circle for why I ended up in this position.
Amazing. Yeah, I have some fantastic memories from visiting Maastricht, and I definitely recommend everyone check it out if they have a chance to do so. Will, thanks so much again for joining us on the podcast and helping us recap this year's edition of TEFAF New York, as well as sharing some of your thoughts on how it fits in the art fair circuit. If our listeners want to learn more about the fair, what's the best website?
It's www.tefaf.com, and please get in touch.
Great. Thanks again, Will.
Thanks, Adam.